Good afternoon. I'd like to apologize for the delay, but we still had a lot of folks who are logging on to the system, but we're going to get ready and get going. This is Donna Enrico, as I said, with DCED, and I have here some of whom will participate in the webinar as well. We'd like to welcome everyone, and what we'd like to go over today is information on HUD Transition Policy, CPD Notice 14-10, dated June 10th, 2014. That was the release of the American Community Survey data and how it was to be used. But we would also like to go over income survey methodology. There are two HUD notices that we will be referencing. HUD CPD Notice 0506, dated July 26, 2005, and the most current HUD CPD Notice 14-013, dated September 2014. I would like to remind everyone that after the webinar is over, we will make the PowerPoint available. We will make all the other forms and information that we referenced in the PowerPoint available. However, please note, and I tried to make this clear, but I don't think it was clear enough, in the application guidelines webinar, it does take several days, if not a week, to have all this information converted into the appropriate type of document to have it uploaded to the Federal Resource Library. But as soon as that is done, we will inform all grantees that that information is available. In the meantime, as I did with some of the information from the application webinar, we will send it separately, but we do ask for your patience to have it placed on the Federal Resource Library. As I said, we have one person in the department responsible for uploading all the content for the entire department. So our information is in the queue and will be waiting to be uploaded. Because there's so much information today on the ACS data and the methodology, what we are asking is that if you could type your questions, we will take those questions after the webinar. We will provide responses to them, and we will be making the Q&A available to everyone through a CD&H alert, as well as uploading to the Federal Resource Library once that is done. We will be able to take a look at all the Q&As after the webinar and ensure that a copy is at least emailed to everyone no later than October 31st, 2014. And hopefully on the screen, you're able to see where to type in all of the questions for us to answer after the webinar. So HUD had issued the CPD Notice 1410, which put an effective date on the low mod income summary data. That's the data that we are used to using to qualify service areas for area benefit activities for our CDBG program. And what the guidance said is that to the fullest extent feasible, this data must be used unless a grantee believes that the data is not current or it does not provide enough information regarding income levels in the entire service area. And that's an important part to state, is that obviously if you have a smaller service area than the boundaries of a census tract or block group, you will definitely need to be doing surveys. But if your service area coincides with a census tract or block group, HUD's recommending that the ACS data be used unless you have data that supports why that information is not current. The low mod income summary data is derived from the American Community Survey data. We do understand that, the sampling that they used is smaller than the previous census data that we used, which we're going to go over. As I said, in the transition policy, the effective date for that data was any projects approved after July 1st, 2014, which made it required for most activities in 2014, the 2014 CDBG application. And as I stated earlier, it affects area benefit activities. The transition policy had in it a 4-part test which needed to be met for any awards to be able to use for subsequent awards. And what it said is that the activity had to have been awarded before the effective date, which is the project that DCED would have approved prior to July 1st, 2014. It had to be specific. It had to have and when we say specific, the activity had to be complete in the activity description, where it was going to be, and you had to have received DCED's approval. And one of the other key points is that it says that a specific amount was approved. Even if you did a multi-year activity, if you did not state what those subsequent years' fundings would be, then it doesn't count. And there was a little qualifier on there. It stated that that amount had to be provided, that the total amount awarded for that activity prior to July 1st, 2014 is not exceeded. And you had to also define a clearly defined service area. If the survey area changes, you cannot meet the 4-part test. And again, HUD specific in saying that each of these 4 parts must be met. It's not one or the other. All 4 must be met in order to use a subsequent funding for an activity using a previous data set and not the latest ACS data. There were limited exceptions and clarifications that they had also stated, and the ones that we've gotten the most questions about have been pre-award costs. And as you're seeing on the screen, what DCED is recommending is reviewing the language in Appendix A of your grant contract, which specifically says for pre-award project costs, they must have received DCED's written approval prior to you receiving that contract. Cost overruns, it is specifically, that's another exception, where it talks about adding money to projects after that July 1st date. And they clearly define that as unexpected increases in cost. And they use the example of doing some type of construction project where once they dug in the ground, they had identified a storage tank, which no one was aware of, which was going to increase the cost of that project. They did not state that just because bids come in above what the cost estimates were, that is a legitimate cost overrun. So I would just suggest that in planning your 2014 activities that you take into consideration these particular issues that are being discussed to decide whether or not you actually can fund that activity in 2014 using previous data. And what we are in the process of doing, DCED is going to develop a policy on pre-award project costs and multi-year funding, keeping in mind the 3-year activity expenditure deadline. That is not ready for release, and so once it is, we will let everyone know. So to move on to the American Community Survey data, everyone should have received the CD&H alert that had the new data in it. If you didn't, we would ask that you would go ahead and tell the department here and let us know that you did not get it. I'd have to check with MJ if it's been uploaded onto the Federal Resource Library. Not yet. It's not up yet, but we will make that available. But we gave you the HUD, I think, link to it as well, so you have it. And the American Community Survey data does replace the census data, so we can no longer use the calendar year 2000 census data. We also stated in that CD&H alert that any survey completed prior to January 1st, 2010 would no longer be accepted, that any surveys conducted after January 2010, DCED would review to ensure that it met the survey methodology and, as far as we could tell, would not have bias in the survey results. So what is the American Community Survey? It's a new way of gaining or obtaining information on certain demographics in the community and replaces the census data. What HUD has done is combined 5 years' worth of data to provide us the latest data we're to use for these area benefit activities. We recognize that ACS uses a smaller sample size than the previous census surveys, but it is combining 5 years' worth of results, which makes it more up-to-date. In speaking with the Penn State Data Center, we have had many discussions with them on the data. ACS currently has the 5-year projection as 1 in 10 households that have been surveyed. But I think the information that I received from the Penn State Data Center is the next release of the 5-year data will actually go to 1 in 8 surveys, or 1 in 8 households will be surveyed. Under the previous census surveys, it was 1 in every 6 households, but every 10 years. You've received those results by municipality as well as census tracts and block groups. We've identified some issues with the data, which hopefully we'll go over today and make it clear what you can use and what you can't use. One of the issues in the ACS data is that there are census tracts and block groups that are shared by multiple jurisdictions or multiple municipalities. If your service area for your activity does not include all those multi-jurisdictional communities, then you will not be able to use the data as it's reported. And what I'd like to show you and explain a little bit about the differences in the data, you'll see on the next slide. It is a community in Butler County. And when you go to the data, I'm going to jump, can you bring up the one block group census tract Excel spreadsheet? We're going to try to bring up the data that we've shared with all of you to show you how it's going to look in the census tract block group data. Yes. Just give us a moment so we can share that spreadsheet with you. Hopefully what everybody is seeing on the screen is the low mod data by census tract, by block group for Butler County. And what we have highlighted in yellow will show you that Bruin Borough, Fairview Township, Parker Township, and Petrolia Borough all share the same census or ACS data. Can you scroll over, John, a little bit, because I can't see what I'm looking at. Okay, so your low mod in this particular instance is 375. That would be column K. The total universe is 1,420, and the low mod percentage, as it's indicated on the screen, is 26.41%. Previously, with census data, HUD would do a run where they could identify split block groups. And what we need to let everyone know is that HUD did not do that. So we cannot identify any lower census geography by this particular data set. So, for instance, if Petrolia Borough were going to do a project that just benefited Petrolia Borough, they could not use this data set because it combines results from the other 3 municipalities, and what you're seeing is a result based upon the larger census, or not census, ACS boundaries. John, could you show the map? It was on the PowerPoint. It's the next slide on the PowerPoint. So when you look at this map, you can see Fairview Township has been identified, and it's rather large. And then up in the upper right-hand corner is Petrolia Borough. And as I stated, HUD has not allowed for these split block groups. And what the data would suggest is that the characteristics in Petrolia Borough may not be similar to that in Fairview Township or Bruin Borough or Parker Township, and therefore, unless In this particular instance, the project encompassed all of those municipalities. You couldn't use that data set. We're going to go back, John, to the Excel spreadsheet where it just had the other PowerPoint, I'm sorry. The slide right before it. So going back to this slide where Petrolia Borough is listed, you will note that there's just a single line on the bottom of the sheet which identifies Petrolia Borough as actually having 61.76% low mod. That kind of threw us for a loop. So again, we went back to the Penn State Data Center to ensure that we could use the HUD data. And if you look at the other spreadsheet that was given to you, it was supplied, which is just the municipal level. John, could you go to the other spreadsheet? So hold on while we bring up and share the other spreadsheet with you. No, the other one. No, not that one. Nope. Maybe you didn't pull it up. We'll try to get it up, but it is the first spreadsheet that we had given you based on municipality only, and HUD is allowing us to use that data. So in this instance, if Petrolia Borough wanted to do a particular activity which benefits all the residents of Petrolia Borough, they could go to the other HUD issued ACS data by municipal level, not by census tract or block group, but by municipal level, and they could use it because that data supports the 61.76%. And we've also compared the 2000 census figures for total population of Petrolia, and the ACS, the 170, is just a few shy of what they had listed under the 2000 census data. What I would suggest, if you run into any issues like this and you're confused by it, to please contact your grant manager. But as I said, unless your multi-municipal boundaries and the data is the service area for your project, when you come across these, you need to determine, does everybody benefit? And if not, then you're going to be required to do a survey unless, okay, John did find the spreadsheet. This is the one that had the, John, can they see the top of that where it says ACS, where it says you are sharing your desktop? Okay. The top of this one just says by municipal data. So this is one of the first ones we sent out, but this is a HUD issued, and we will accept that for Petrolia Borough. And again, the only thing that I can suggest is if you continue to find these sort of aberrations in the data, let DCED know. We are trying to vet these specific instances through the data center. They have access to the HUD data as well to determine if it is data that we can use. Yep, you can go ahead. We've already gone over the split block groups, so we can just keep coming. Okay, income surveys. As you know, DCED had issued their own survey methodology years ago. We had continued to use that survey methodology. However, HUD had issued their own survey methodology in a CPD notice that we had referenced earlier, which under our CD&H alert, we had identified that as of that alert, if you were conducting surveys, you had to abide by the HUD CPD notice. It is very similar to the previously issued DCED survey methodology, but a couple things that were either clarified in the HUD notice, the HUD methodology. There were two issues. One were seasonal units, and I'm thinking about the other one that was a little bit different. Oh, just on if you're doing surveys, census surveys, how do you compute the low mod? And census surveys are those that you're going after 100% of your universe. But we will get to that. Those were two things that were clarified. So So surveys support a critical element of the program. It is the national objective justification for low-mod benefit, sometimes referred to as fundability. That is that two-part test that we have to meet up front as well as on the back end. Has to be an eligible activity we're doing, but we also must ensure that our funds are benefiting one of the national objectives. And in order to do that, we sometimes have to do these surveys. If you want to look at what the regulations state, I've listed both the entitlement regulations as well as the state regs because the state in the administration of the program has defaulted to the federal requirements for entitlement grantees as well as, the state program regulations. So the first thing that, you really need to look at is to define who's benefiting from these particular projects or activities that are being proposed. Again, defining it means sometimes having to go out and review that project area. Talk with your engineers or talk with whoever's proposing the project. Really understand who's benefiting so that you can identify the number of families in the universe, because that's where you have to start to determine how are you going to identify what type of listing are you going to use. And how you identify who it is in there is critical to understand the definition of family in undertaking these surveys, to account for households that do not have landlines, perhaps, if part of your survey methodology is to do a phone survey. You need to know if you need to account for rental properties. As we discussed in our previous webinar last week, if you have a high percentage of folks that may be of limited English proficiency, how will your surveys be made available to those particular segments of the population? What happens when you identify multiple families in a unit? And again, typically this is more so in your rental housing stock if you've identified a project area that has a high number of rentals. And as I said, temporary and seasonal homes, the other things that I've just reviewed are pretty much standard and were a part of DCED's previous survey methodology guidance that we had given you. The temporary and seasonal homes in CPD Notice 0506, pages 11 and 12, you will read in there, it kind of identifies and gives some examples of projects where you can leave seasonal homes out if their use of the proposed project that you are proposing would be just incidental. And the example that they use, if you've not read it, is that if you have an area where you have some seasonal homes and you're doing, and I'll use hunting camps as the example, and you're proposing to do the roof on the local library, and your community does not meet low mod and you want to undertake a survey, do you have to survey the seasonal homes? I would deem that those types of seasonal homes, those folks are not there to use the library, but rather are there for another reason, and they would be deemed incidental, not having to be surveyed. But their second example was you're extending a water and sewer line, and these homes will be a part of the proposed project where they will tie into the system. HUD says that the benefit to those homes is more than incidental. So in that case, you may have to track down those seasonal units. Again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. I would ask that we're getting a lot of feedback, and while we've tried to mute everyone who has connected properly, there may be someone who is not connected properly, and if you could mute your line, I would appreciate it. So as I said, it's important to understand who's being targeted for income surveys, and we are going to go over those types of who it is that we really need to focus on. Is it families, households? And then how do we calculate the numbers that we need to go after and our response rate? So family versus household income. We conduct a survey, which group is being measured? Families. That's who we need to look at, families in the service area. And a definition of family is all the persons living in the same house who are related by birth, marriage, or adoption. And the household is listed as all persons who occupy a housing unit. But for surveys, HUD clearly defines that we have to go after family income. Calculating response rates. Why do grantees need to do this? To ensure that the area being surveyed is well represented and the results are statistically reliable. And hopefully we will walk you through on how to calculate a response rate. Recognize that in HUD CPD Notice, they will give you in a chart a number, but not all numbers are listed. There is a survey calculator or a calculation response rate calculator out there. In a few slides we're going to go over. So let's talk about when we do a service area that has 100 families or less. Even in our previous survey methodology, it was recommended that you go after 100% of those families for response to make it statistically reliable. We talk about that being a census survey, not a capital C as in the Census Bureau, but a census survey is one where you go after 100% of the results. And again, if you refer to pages 10 through 11 of that CPD notice, it walks you through this. And what you have to do is you go after all of them because there's always going to be some non-responses, some vacancies that occur that you may not have been aware of, even if you've gone on site. So you need 100% response rate. And what HUD also says is that not 51% of the total universe, or it is 51% of the total universe, that must be LMI, not 51% of your responses, especially if you less responses than 100%. And as I said, I don't want to get into explaining it because if you read pages 10 and 11 of the CPD Notice 0506, it is very clear what they're getting at with this particular, only when you're doing census surveys, going after 100%. And as I said, DCED's policy is if you have 100 families or less, you are going after 100% of them. But I know in the past some communities wanted to do 100% census surveys in their community so that they could break up portions by their responses in, without having to go back and resurvey. So it's very important if you decide to do 100% to look at pages 10 and 11 of the notice. So for the surveys that you do where you're calculating the response rate randomly, we've given you the instructions here, and if you'll bear with me in a minute, Dave Gray is going to take you through the sample size calculator to determine what your sample size is going to be. In the PowerPoint, hopefully when we put it on the web, it is a hot link. It will take you directly to this sample size calculator. You will select that 95% confidence level. You'll put input 5 for the confidence interval, which just goes right off of the table in the HUD methodology. And then you'll put in the number of families in your service area, select calculate, and then that will give you your sample size. Dave, would you like to go through that now?
John, do you want to bring up the calculator? For our example, first off, confidence level is 95%. Confidence interval is 5. And then in this instance, let's say we have a sewer system that has 400 users, so that's, our population would be 400. And then all you do is hit calculate, and that's your sample size. So out of the 400 people, you need 196 income surveys for that population. To account for over-sampling, to account for non-responses and vacancies, we would divide 196 by 80%, and that would give us a total of 245. And that.
But before we leave here, can I just, I want to stress is that in the HUD table, the HUD table only lists certain numbers of family sizes. What this does is you can put your exact number of family size or, you know, the number of families that you have in your service area in. And if you look at the table for 400, 196 is there. They go 5 below, 5 above, but that's exactly how HUD is calculating this. You will put in, and maybe, you know, put in 623. And that would be your number. So that's what you're going to do. Those are going to be the number of families that actually need to be surveyed under a random survey. Okay. Now, if we go back with the PowerPoint.
Again, just going over how to calculate how many income surveys need to be distributed. You'll take your sample size, divide that by 80% or 0.80, and that'll equal the number of income surveys to be distributed, either through mail, door-to-door, or telephone.
And again, that's to account for your non-responses and any vacancies that might occur in there. This piece is not new. This was in DCED's previous methodology, but we thought it was important so that when you're determining your sample size, you're accounting for these non-responses or these vacancies and not having to continuously go back and go after more, a bigger universe. So again, this is what Dave had just walked through. It's very easy to use, and all we would say is that when you go through and you're looking at your surveys, you really need to validate once you do receive the surveys back. Somebody has to look at them to validate that you've got the required number of responses, that if you're requiring signatures, there are signatures. If you don't have signatures, that they're filled out properly, that if, you know, you have a 3-person household or family size, pardon me, that the income level is checked off beside that 3-person household, not checked off under a 1-person household or an 8-person. Those are the things that when DCED staff are on site trying to review surveys that have been conducted, that we see some issues with is that the results themselves have not been validated, that there are issues with some of the results that have been included as a good return of a survey when in fact they are not. So we would just ask that you go ahead and have somebody review them for those types of issues. So when we're calculating low mod benefit, we talked earlier about that 100 persons. Now these are persons, not necessarily families. So, you know, you have to look at your total number of persons on these 100% response rates to determine how many you at least need 51%. So in this particular example, our results would be you need 51 people out of the 100 surveys to be a valid return. And again, make sure that the survey forms are completed properly. If you're achieving less than 100% response rate, the results must be 51% of the overall population. And again, I had pointed this out earlier in the CPD notice when this only applies for those surveys where you're doing 100% of the population, whether it's a small number or you're doing a large number. You have to be very careful with this particular one. On random surveys, you will not have to worry about it because your the K2 will account for your entire universe. And so as long as your results prove 51%, we should be good. I know that a lot of folks are not in agreement with ACS data. And we have extensively talked with the Penn State Data Center about validating surveys when they're conducted that have a large deviation from the ACS data. And so what DCED has decided is that if anyone, any municipality, as long as you're within a bounded area, that you have census tract or block group data that supports a low mod population of less than 46%, and that's the given ACS data, that you as the grantee will be required to provide to DCED any known demographic changes that may have impacted the ACS data prior to undertaking the survey, and you will need to receive DCED's approval before moving forward. So what DCED is looking for is what has occurred in the community since 2010, which would be the last year of the ACS, the 2006 through 2010 combination of the ACS data. What's happened since then that would support a large jump, and when we say a large jump, more than 5 percentage points to get to 51% or more total population being low and moderate income. And some of those examples would be is in the community, have there been significant job losses? Have there been natural disasters that have changed the fabric of your community, and you've had a population loss where people have just picked up and left, or other types of demographics that would support these changes? And again, we're looking for changes in the community since the last ACS data was used, and that's 2010. So I just want to emphasize we don't want people to go out and waste their time. We want to know if there are significant changes that could support a significant jump in the survey results compared to the most current ACS. And while DCED is not comparing the 2000 census data, what we are doing is looking at what those trends are. And most times what we've looked at in the communities is that the data that was produced from the 2000 census data to the current ACS data that HUD is using, that the changes have not been significant in population nor in low mod. We are seeing just a few percentage points in the majority of the communities that we looked at. I'm not going to say it has occurred in all of them, but but the trending is very similar, and that's why we've put this particular piece in there, is to make sure that there is something in the community which would account for a large change in the trend. The grantee's responsibilities will be to follow the HUD survey methodology. Any methodology that you would propose that deviates from the HUD CPD notice must be submitted to DCED and receive our approval. For all surveys that are submitted with a 2014 application submission or any revisions or modifications going forward, first off, you need to have policies to include training procedures, calculation methods, interviewing procedures. And what we would like to say is that to take the bias out of survey results is that interviewers, anyone conducting these surveys, should be someone who would not have any interest in the project, that the interviewers should be neutral and have no vested interest in there. And again, this is to alleviate any perceived or known biases that can occur because of their vested interest in these projects. And as I said, I started to say, I got a little ahead of myself, is that For each survey conducted, you will need, as the grantee, you will be required to submit the following documentation with each income survey. Now, everything is not listed here because your activity description is going to be in the application kit already. You are going to have a map that defines the project area as well as the service area. So those things should already be in your application kit. If you conduct a survey, you will now lay behind in the application kit the following information for each of the surveys, and they need to be identified for which projects they're supporting. You will have an income survey cover sheet. John, could you go to that? Now, these have not been made available to you, but this information should look familiar to some of you. We've updated it. So you will put the following information in there about the project, where it's occurring, what fiscal year funding is being used for this, the type of survey. We will have stuff in there about, did you publicize this particular survey attempt? When was it done? All the follow-ups. Did you have follow-ups by phone? Did you have follow-ups by door-to-door? Whatever you do in conducting this survey, it has to be spelled out on this form. Just go ahead and scroll through it, John. There's just a lot of things to be the week you conducted, the times, who conducted it. It does talk about the people who are doing it. Do they have a vested interest in there? We will want to know the script that was used. If you did not use the script, why not? Because part of keeping the integrity in the survey results is having those interviewers say the same thing every time they approach a family, a household unit, to make sure that the same information is being provided. And I'm sure a lot of times folks don't even think that they're biasing the results, but they start talking to their neighbor because they know what's going on. And they say, oh, yes, because we have to have income information, and if we don't have a certain amount of low mod, we aren't going to be able to get funding for our local community center. Your interviewer may not understand that what they just said has the potential to bias the results. And so that's why we're trying to make sure that we eliminate as much as possible any bias into these surveys. All the information that we've just gone over and how to conduct your survey, identify the universe, the numbers, those will all be put on here. The family distribution sizes will also be put on there. And again, these were separated in different forms under our old methodology. We've now just combined it to be on the same sheet. So can we go to the next one, which was the K2 form? And again, this is one that a lot of you are familiar with, and we will be putting this one out there so that you folks will use the DCED form. And there's nothing new on this particular one. And then the survey results distribution sheet. This one just gives us a little bit more information about the actual results of the survey. So what I would say is, and this one will have some of the information on it that is necessary for the racial characteristics that you need for the IDIS system, if you know it. We're asking for it here, and how everything was tabulated. So once you see these forms, if you have questions, just, shoot them to us. If you haven't had them today, let me go back to the PowerPoint. Oh, and one of the staff is reminding me to let everyone know is that, on the K2 form, you really need to put down the original, and I'll have to make sure that we have it on there, and then the projected. Don't just do the projected. We have to know what your actual results were, because when we come on site to review these survey results, we're looking to see your actual results. And if they don't mesh with what you submitted to us, there will always be questions. So make sure you put your actuals and then your projected in there. And as I said, I know that we haven't answered everybody's questions. It is a tough topic to do in a webinar, so we'd like to have those questions submitted to us. If you don't have or haven't had time to submit them online, I would ask that you submit them to me. Everybody has my email address. We will get those to everyone. But I want to tell you the next couple slides that we have are questions that we had submitted to HUD, some of these several weeks ago, where we have still not received an answer on. I think they go back to as far as early September. But we want you to know we are looking to confirm these answers for everyone. And the first question is, can ACS data be combined with an income survey? And the example is the county's conducting a survey, and one of the municipalities is 51% by ACS, but the remaining 7 communities are not. Can you use the ACS data to be combined with surveying the remaining communities who are not over 51%? HUD methodology does not address combining census and survey. I know that DCED had a policy, but it was used in very limited instances, but we have put this forth to HUD for them to give us a response. The transition policy, question 2, allows the community to use block group data for a smaller portion of the population in the block group if that population is representative of the entire block group. What we've asked for is this a correct read on the transition policy. And if you look on pages 5 and 6, they give a very good example. And what we're saying is we will allow that as long as there's nothing in those block groups or census tracts that would tell us that your smaller service area is not indicative of the rest of the population. So if you have any questions on that, I would say look at the transition policy, pages 5 and 6, to understand that particular piece. And if you still have questions, but we're making sure that we've interpreted HUD is allowing that to be done. We've had several questions on bids being awarded by local governments at a cost higher than what was approved by DCED. In this particular example, the community had awarded the bid at a higher price, but unfortunately did not come in for a revision to that activity prior to July 1st. We're seeking to request HUD to allow those, but we are not certain of this question is in for HUD at this point. And the last one is that the HUD methodology does not address college students per se. And I know that we've run into communities that have a lot of college students in their population, not just in the group quarter settings, the dormitories, and so we're seeking additional guidance from HUD on college students. So as soon as our 4 questions are answered, we will also provide that to everyone. And as I stated, all of the information that we've gone over today with the will be posted on the Federal Resource Library. We will be sending the PowerPoint out as well as our updated forms that need to come in with surveys. Once we have all of the questions obtained from you folks, as I said, we would like to review those, provide answers to them, and also supply that to everyone no later than next Friday, October 31st. So with that being said, we appreciate everybody's participation today on the webinar. And as I said, any questions, if you haven't been able to submit them via the webinar, as we sign off in the next 5 minutes, you can send those questions directly to me at denrico@pa.gov. Thank you very much.